This episode of No Filter is brought to you by the Toyota Kluger.
There's really no point in worrying about things happening in the future. They may not happen, they may, and you just don't know how you're going to feel about them anyway. So, yeah, I stay in the moment as much as I can.
Why has this happened to me? Will I ever stop comparing my child to other people's kids? What on earth will our future look like? For the past 3 years, these are just some of the questions that have floated in and out of Melanie Dimmitt's head. Questions she felt that she couldn't even utter out loud. Until now. From Mamma Mia, I'm Mia Friedman, and you're listening to No Filter, the podcast where you get to hear a very candid conversation with someone who has a story to tell. Melanie is a journalist. She's also the mum of 2 little kids under the age of 3, Arlo and Odie. She hadn't planned to have 2 kids under 3, but after the birth of her firstborn, Arlo, she didn't have a choice. More on that later. When Arlo was born, things didn't go exactly according to plan, which is not even a little bit surprising for a birth story, I know, but this one was even more unusual than most. Mel needed an emergency caesarean and Arlo was left without oxygen for 10 minutes. It wasn't until 6 months later that Mel and her partner found out that Arlo was diagnosed with cerebral palsy. It's a congenital disorder of movement, muscle tone, or posture that is often caused by brain damage. Mel did not know what to do after she got that diagnosis or how to handle it. There was fear around everything she felt at the time, even the way that she spoke about Arlo to other people. But this was her own son. Where was the roadmap for this life she'd suddenly been dropped into? Mel couldn't find anything to read that she could relate to, so she decided to write down everything she felt and everything she was learning in a book. Special is the name of Mel's book. And yes, she knows some people are not going to like the title that she chose. The world of disability and disability advocacy is broad and diverse, and just like any other group, there are different opinions about whether special is an okay word to use or not. Mel and I talked about that in this conversation, along with all the other questions that I had about Arlo, Mel's daughter Odie, and the hot mess that is parenting. Mel, welcome.
Thank you.
You start your book in hospital when you're about to give birth to Arlo, and you describe something that I've never heard described in such vivid detail before, which is that you seem to be having a pretty normal labour, you had the heart monitor on, and then they lost his heartbeat. And you talk about the nurse frantically trying to find it and then someone making the decision, you've got to have an emergency caesarean. And I've always wondered about the transition between we have to get this baby out fast. Can you explain what happened from that moment?
It was really quick. A button was pressed, the emergency button was pressed, and suddenly about 10 people ran into the room and were surrounding my bed. Like poor Ro was sort of shoved off to the side.
That's your husband.
Yeah, well, we're not married, but yeah, my partner.
Living in sin. We'll overlook that just for the course of this interview.
So all these people were suddenly in the room, very professional but very frantic. There was definitely like a sense of urgency in the air.
How long had you been in labour?
So technically I wasn't in labour. We were there to be induced and we were being prepped to be induced, and that's why we had the heart monitor on. And the reason we were in there was because I noticed that Arlo's movements were a bit weird, and they always say come in if anything feels odd. And
he was full term, and sometimes they do stop moving so much at the end.
Yeah. So he was 4 days past the due date. So we went in on that afternoon and they said, oh, look, he seems all right, but we'll keep you in overnight. We'll keep checking in on him. They did throughout the night, and the next morning we got brought down to the birthing suite. And we're all connected up. They were just about to induce me, and Ro and I were in the room on our own, and we were watching the heart monitor, and we were sort of playing a game because it would fluctuate a little bit, and we were like, oh, high score and stuff. And then we just noticed it really plummeted all of a sudden. And that's when we pressed the button and the nurse came in and tried to find the heartbeat, couldn't find it. She pressed the emergency button. All these people flooded in, and then like within seconds they were like, okay, this is happening. We're going to go do an emergency caesarean. I was being taken to theatre. The bed was rolled out of the room. It smashed into the door frame a few times on the way out. And I was like, trying not to freak out. I just watched as Ro's face kind of disappeared into the distance as I was being rolled out, and I was so worried about him. And we were going down the hallway. I was in the bed and there were all these doctors running alongside me, really professionally introducing themselves and saying, I'm so-and-so, this is my job, we're going to take care of you and your baby. So they were all being, really calm, but I could tell there was like this real sense of we've got to get this baby out now. And I was just like, put me under, and got into theatre.
Were you scared?
I wasn't really, because luckily I love hospitals. Like, my dad's a doctor. My brother and I grew up always playing in hospitals. I was very comfortable in the hospital space, and I knew that I had a free pass out of this. I knew they were going to put me under. I knew that when I woke up it would all be over and it would be sorted out. I felt more for Ro.
You talked about something that I'd never thought before, which is they were flying you down the corridors, someone was shaving your pubic hair.
I'm pretty sure that's when it was happening. It all happened so quickly that it felt like it was while I was going down. It might have been in the theatre room.
I thought that was the most extraordinary detail because, people say, I had to have an emergency cesarean, and I've never known what that actually looks like and all the different components as everyone just goes, it's like a SWAT team.
It is. It totally is. And it happened so fast. So I can't remember if that was starting to happen as like in motion or if it really quickly happened once we were in there. But I was out, like they put the mask on and I was gone, and I was just like, thank God. And I didn't have to live through a bit of it.
What's your next memory?
It's coming to and the surgeon sort of being in my face and me asking him, first question, is he alive? And the surgeon said, yes. And my second question was, does he have Down syndrome? And the surgeon was a bit puzzled and was like, well, no, because that had been a concern that we'd had the whole way through the pregnancy because, we did that test that you do at the beginning and there was a slightly higher chance. Arlo also had a hole in his heart the whole way through his pregnancy, which we thought was going to be our problem going forward. Like he might have had to have surgery when he was born and things like that. The hole closed up. So out of everything, that was not the problem.
A hole in the heart sounds like a big deal, but it's weirdly common, right?
Yes.
And it often does close up on its own.
Yeah, and it did. But, we'd been quite closely monitored for that throughout the pregnancy and we'd been worried about that. And neither of us had spoken about it to each other, but we'd both been thinking there was a chance it could be related to Down syndrome. Yeah. So part of me thought, and obviously in my funky fog when I woke up, I was like, does he have Down syndrome? And the surgeon was like, well, no. And I just thought, oh, thank God, like we've done this. It's all going to be okay. And they wheeled me into what I didn't realise at the time was the NICU, so the neonatal intensive unit. And they put Arlo on my shoulder. He was with Rowan in there. And they just put this little baby on my shoulder. He had tubes and things coming out of him. And he just looked right into my eyes. Like he has these beautiful blue eyes. They were like navy blue when he was little. And this little baby boy just stared straight into my eyes. And all the nurses around were like, wow, like you don't often see that. Like that kid is super alert, and obviously they were probably thinking for a potentially brain damaged child. But
which you didn't know yet?
No idea. And yeah, the people around us must have known, but we didn't. Like we knew obviously his birth wasn't ideal. But at that point in time, I just thought, hey, I got to miss the whole birth thing. Here's my baby. They rescued him. He's alive. Rowan had seen a lot of other stuff. Rowan's quite traumatized from the birth. I just got to cruise on through unconscious.
Was he there when Arlo was taken out?
He was put into a room by himself. So he was freaking out. He thought we were both going to die because all he saw was us being wheeled away. Then they said, come in, he got scrubbed up, everything ready to go in for the cesarean. And then he was at the door. He caught a glimpse of this kind of horror scene of blood and my tummy open and stuff. And then they said, actually, you can't come in. So he was then left alone again. But then when Arlo was born, he was allowed to go in, and Arlo was apparently really upset. We'd later learned with brain damage, you get like a cracking headache. So he was obviously in a lot of pain and like really distressed and needed a bit of oxygen at the time. So Rowan was with Arlo then, and it was really distressing for him. But when I got to him, he was calm and seemed pretty fine, seemed like a baby.
How long had he been without oxygen, and who was the one that told you that?
10 minutes he'd been without oxygen. So they got him out pretty freaking fast.
From when they lost the heartbeat
Yeah.
in the birth suite.
Yeah, it was 10 minutes. And they told us that because, after that we were in hospital for a week. Arlo was in NICU. I was on the ward recovering from the C-section. So we were on different levels, and Rowan would run between the two, like taking videos of Arlo and bringing them up to me. And we couldn't touch Arlo because they cooled him down for 72 hours, which is a method they use to prevent further brain damage. So he was in this kind of cooling incubator thing, and he was shivering, his little body was shivering, and we couldn't hold him, and that was really hard. But aside from that, the nurses were looking after him. They were.
And what could they tell you about the fact, 10 minutes, I just assumed that you couldn't come back from being 10 minutes without oxygen. I thought the most would be 1 minute or something like that. What did they tell you about prognosis?
Well, they would say little bits and pieces, but we kept looking at this baby, and he seemed pretty good. He was responding well. He was breastfeeding, which, in retrospect, is bloody amazing. So they said, look, it wasn't good, and we've done an MRI, and there's bilateral damage to the motor section of his brain, but you just need to focus on the baby in front of you. He's looking good. So they were really positive, but looking back, things were said to us that we kind of I was convinced it was going to be fine. When they let us go, they pulled us in to have a meeting and said, look, this could be cerebral palsy. I didn't know what that was, and I really didn't want to know what that was at the time. And I was just no, he'll be fine. He'll be fine. Our families were all look at him. He seems great. And I just didn't want to know about it. I really avoided that potential outcome and just focused on this beautiful kid and the happy fuzz of having a new baby. And I was so well rested because I hadn't had to look after that baby for a whole week, and they'd taught us how to do everything, bath him and feed him. And for such a, it sounds horrific what happened, but from my experience, it really wasn't so bad.
And you had nothing to compare him to, right?
Nah, first kid, and I'd had very little to do with babies other than that. So, yeah, we had no idea. We were flying blind.
So it wasn't until 6 months that he was diagnosed?
He was officially diagnosed at 6 months. Prior to that, we'd been monitored. We had to go back to the growth clinic at the hospital. We were seeing a community physiotherapist who would always kind of say to us, maybe you should check in with the Cerebral Palsy Alliance. And we were just no, don't think so.
Did you Google?
I really tried not to, because every time you Google cerebral palsy, it says things 50% of people with it are in chronic pain. It just says horrible stuff. And I just so wasn't ready to go there. I was so convinced that that wasn't what this was. And, yeah, Arlo was a beautiful baby. He was smiley, but he didn't meet any of his motor milestones.
Like what?
He could do a bit of tummy time, hold his head up, but he never rolled. He never sat. He still doesn't.
So was it a slow dawning realisation, and did you and Ro talk about it, or did you just kind of keep your fears to yourself?
It was very slow dawning. We were lucky it was kind of drip fed into our lives. We talked about it, but it just happened so gradually that it was never a major issue until that 6 month point when we got the diagnosis. And even beyond that, because cerebral palsy is so broad and Arlo was still so young, then it's very much a wait and see. So we could live quite comfortably in denial even beyond that for a while. And we stayed there and we clung to that as long as possible.
What were you told, and who told you?
So we went in and saw a pediatrician who we hadn't seen before, but he was really good. And we took Arlo in and he examined Arlo, and, Arlo was quite stiff and sort of not doing much. And he said, look, I'm going to give you this diagnosis of cerebral palsy. That could mean anything. He said some people only have it in one finger. He must have known that this was not the one finger kind of cerebral palsy, but he very kindly delivered it in that way and said, look, I'm going to give you this diagnosis so as you can start early intervention and get funding. So I was he's just doing it as a courtesy, just to make life easier for us. I was still very much this is going to be fine. I remember I said to the pediatrician, oh, so, is there still a chance he could get out of this scot-free? And they were like, well, no. But he was really great. And he actually said he himself had a child with disability and that, you're really fine when you're at home in your own bubble. It's only when you're out in the world having to explain your child to other people that it really sucks. And he was right. We've really found that. But as far as D-Day, like diagnosis day goes, ours was pretty nice. Like I've heard some absolute shockers and ours was pretty good and gentle.
Did you and Ro deal with it in the same way?
I don't think we could have. We were pretty much on the same page because we'd both had so much to do with him. We were both still very much like, stay positive, this will be fine. But we kept crying and we kept getting really sad. And it was like this big rain cloud had suddenly settled over our lives. But we just, we got busy. We stayed distracted. Arlo had tons of appointments. We were both working. But, yeah, we were lucky. Like I've spoken to other parents who've been on totally different pages because the mum has been the one who's been most involved going to all the appointments, with the baby most of the time. So the dad off at work isn't really in the moment, doesn't really get what's going on. So that would be harder. Luckily, Ro and I have both been, it's very 50-50. At the moment, he's doing more parenting than me. So we were pretty much at the same point in the process of, dealing with it.
Mel, can you explain what cerebral palsy is?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask me this. I'm so bad at like the medical.
It's so funny you say that because my cousin and our mutual friend, Dane Sherman, says the same thing where she said, oh, I'm so bad at the medical side of it. And she's written her own book and she talks in it about how her husband took the role of, and he's got a background in science, so took the role of learning all the medical stuff. And she said she actively didn't want to know that. She just wanted to be her son's mum.
Yeah.
Because I would have assumed you'd now be able to rattle off a whole lot of stuff about, 5 fun facts about cerebral palsy. Here's what it is.
Many mothers would. That's not my style. I'm a lot like Ondine. I'm happy to only know what I need to know, and then sometimes I even quickly forget that. I had no idea what cerebral palsy was at the start. And yeah, like I said, I was happy not to know. But generally speaking, it is an umbrella term that covers a whole range of movement disorders caused by an anomaly in the brain. So for Arlo, the brain damage from his birth.
Is it usually, is it congenital usually, or it's caused by lack of oxygen at birth?
Yeah, it's acquired. So again, I can't even say if that's the right way to describe it, but it's not a genetic condition. It's something has happened in the brain to cause it.
And I'm being very careful with my language now. Please pull me up on it. But I guess another way of asking you is, how is Arlo different to kids his age? Is that the right, other kids his age? Is that the right way to ask you?
Oh, that's so fun. And please don't worry about how you ask me, like all this fear around the language. I just think it means people don't ask questions. And I think...
Yeah, I think people are scared of being accidentally offensive.
Yes.
With the words that we use or the questions that we ask.
Yeah, and I mean, so am I. And I mean, even, we'll talk about it later, but even in the book, there are words and ways I've spoken about things in there that I wouldn't necessarily say or go about saying that way now. So you learn a lot when you're in this. But
well, let's talk about language for a second. You say in the book at the end, you say, I'm a different person now to the person I was when I started this journey.
Yes.
And I think we'll be forgiven for using that term outside of reality TV. This journey and writing this book. And you said things like, I would say, how did you break the news to your family when you were interviewing other parents of children with disability? And now you would not say that. And even around the risk of Down syndrome. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, well, just using words like that just sets such a negative tone. Like I say in the book, you don't break the news of your engagement. Like you celebrate that news. Whereas I kept saying throughout early drafts of the book, like, yeah, they broke the news of the diagnosis. So you've just got to be mindful, I suppose, of how you talk about this. Even like when someone says, oh, how's Arlo? If I sort of say, oh, he's got millions of appointments, he's doing this and that, physio and OT. It's like, why launch into that? Why not just say he's great, he's really enjoying his books, and starting on the more positive parts. But even on that question, it's interesting when people ask, how's Arlo? They will sometimes say, so how's Arlo?
With a head tilt?
Yes. And the
How's
downward.
Arlo?
How's Arlo? And
How's
it's like
Arlo?
with Odie, they're like, so how's Odie? You know, it's so different. It makes huge, it just sets up a really negative tone for the conversation.
Yeah, right. And the title of your book is special.
Yes.
Tell me about that word.
So that's an interesting word. It's a word that I used to use in a way that I shouldn't have. I would use it to describe things or people that were pissing me off. When I decided to call the book special originally...
Do you mean like you'd say, oh...
that person's pretty special, or, you know, my computer's being a bit special. Yeah, not good.
Like in a sarcastic way.
Yeah, and like a derogatory way. Like not in a good way. So my initial idea with calling the book special was I want to reclaim that word. Yes, our children are special. They're amazing. They're unique. They're incredible. But then as I went along, I was like, well, they're not. Like, certainly no more special than any other child, or unspecial than any other child is, maybe special in their parents' eyes. They're not. They're children. So by the end of it, I was like, no, the thing that's special about this is the experience of parenting a child with disability, how that has changed me, what I've learned, how my perspective on life, on everything has changed, and how every single person that meets him is changed, and, you know, fear goes away and they sort of realize, hey, he's just a kid. That is what's special. And it's kind of hard to put into words. And I talk about that in the book. It's like becoming a part of this secret society where people look at you with pity and they think that's my worst nightmare. But you kind of know, like, I get this layer of knowledge, and I don't want to get too woo-woo, but almost like enlightenment that you'll never understand. And that is so special.
Special needs?
Yeah, that is a word a phrase I probably wouldn't have used if I was writing this book over. Certainly now that I've been reading some books from people with disability, like Carly Finley's book, for example, and sort of, you know, listening more to people with disability, more immersing myself in those sorts of conversations. I'm not sure I would use special needs. So in the final edit, I took out a whole bunch of them. So now when I use it, it's only to describe special needs parents, because we kind of need that. There isn't really a word for us. And I don't know that special needs parents is the right one, but it's the one that's used. And that's how you'll access, certainly on social media, you know, hashtag special needs parents, you'll find whole communities. Like, that's sort of what we identify.
Because as parents, you do have special needs.
Yeah, so maybe it is
that are different to parents of children without a disability.
Exactly. And we need a word. And I mean, with regard to using it to talk about your child, I totally understand how it's not good if you're kind of hiding behind that word and using it as a euphemism. But at the start of this thing, I, for one, was too scared to say the word disability in relation to my son. I think maybe some of us need a little bit of special needs at the start of this just to ease into it. I feel entirely differently now.
So the best word, the best way of describing someone with disability?
Well, why not just say their disability? Like, I just say Arlo has cerebral palsy. You know, if I'm talking about him, I'll say specifically what
cerebral
it is.
Palsy.
Yeah, and epilepsy. So now that's certainly how I feel. I don't use the word special needs when I'm talking about Arlo or children, more in the sense of it's a special needs space, special needs parents. But even that, I'm not sure that it's the right word. We just don't have anything else at this point in time.
You mentioned epilepsy. When did that show up?
2 years, and it's quite common for kids with cerebral palsy to also have epilepsy from the brain damage. Again, we were like, no, that won't be us. That's not going to happen. And then he started having very mild, just focal seizures. So his wrist would just flick for a few minutes and his mouth would do a funny twitch. Nothing too scary yet. So, yeah, we got that diagnosis when he was about 2 years old, and it meant he had to go on medication, which sucked because we loved being able to say in all of his appointments, oh, no medications, and then he's now on 4 or 5.
Isn't that funny that you held on to that as a kind of status symbol is the wrong word, but as a talisman of
oh, you cling to whatever you
Yeah.
can get. Seriously. And we had that and we loved being able to say that in appointments. But it's funny, I was telling my dad that when we got the diagnosis and he was like, well, that's all about you, isn't it? I'm like, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So true. Like,
It's like wanting him to be as close to the
norm.
as
Yeah.
other kids.
Yeah.
With his cerebral palsy, is it always just a physical impairment or is it a mental impairment as well?
People with cerebral palsy can also have, an intellectual disability. I don't know if that's the cerebral palsy per se or if that's just if there's brain damage in the area of the brain where it would be intellectual. Yeah, but it is common.
And how are you able to pinpoint, and I know that so much of kids and disability is unpinpointable, which is an astonishing thing for those without a child with disability to realise. You kind of like, but what do you mean they haven't told you the exact specifications? Sometimes they just don't know.
They don't, and that is so frustrating because at the start you just want to know 100%.
What are we dealing with?
Yeah, exactly. And it is so annoying because you get a diagnosis, but even then, like CP, cerebral palsy, is so broad. So it is very much a wait and see, which is like agony. It's so hard at the start of this, especially when you've just got like a squidgy baby who, wouldn't have developed much anyway, and you really just have to wait and see what switches on and what doesn't.
And also not having, when it's your first, not having anything to compare him to. So you don't know when he's meant to roll over. I mean, the books say, but, lots of kids don't hit those milestones.
Yeah, that was good for me though. I love not knowing. We got to stage now that we've had another child, I was like, man, we would have known pretty early on and we would have been so scared. And other parents I've met who it's been their second or third kid with disability, had such a hard time of it from a really early age and often would tell doctors, there's something wrong and they'd be told, no. Yeah, I think we were kind of lucky that he was our first in that sense.
Are you in the car right now with the kids and struggling to hear me talk? Maybe you've got kids who are complaining that they're too hot or too squished or uncomfortable. Maybe it's time for a car upgrade. The new Toyota Kluger ensures that there's enough room for every member of the family. With leather accented seats, 6-speaker touchscreen audio system and a sleek finish, the kids won't have anything to complain about. Plus, the Kluger is equipped with 7 SRS airbags and all the latest technology to keep you and the family safe. The Toyota Kluger, built for families, designed for attention. The first part of your book is called The End of the World.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you about grief. Grief for the baby you didn't have. How does that play out?
It's all about your expectations. And I think, when you're pregnant, you have all these ideas, or even before you're pregnant, you have all these ideas about what your child will be. And, children are sold to us in this way, like I say in the book, in these beautiful little packages of duck egg blue and pastel pink. Like that's how babies are sold to us. A child having a disability, it's not presented as an option. Even though, it's not that uncommon. It is an option. That's not is, what's sold to us. And yeah, we do. We have all these ideas, we imagine our child right through their childhood into adulthood. Of course we do. Like that's just natural. And then to be told, no, that's not going to happen and be presented with a blank slate or, a gaping hole of mystery that you then go and fill with whatever you've Googled and these horror stories that you've invented. It's so terrifying. And you do grieve. And, I didn't like the word grief at the start. I didn't like how people were saying that around me. I was like, my son isn't dead. But it's a different kind of grief, and it's grieving the loss of that dream, of those hopes. And it's the stages, it was very much in denial and then moving through anger, and you do seem to go through these stages. It's not linear. It's not neat. I don't think any grief is. I think we're kind of moving away from that structure now. But you'll kind of get to a point where you feel all right and then something will happen. You'll walk past a shop with little kids' shoes in it and it will hit you and you'll be right back at stage 1 and it will be horrible for a couple of days. So it's kind of grief on loop for quite some time.
Because your son can't walk.
No. Well, he's learning. He can walk in his gait trainer, but no, left to his own.
What's a gait trainer?
It's like a walking frame that holds him around the middle. So we have taught him after many, many physio appointments how to use his legs. So he can take steps when fully supported in a gait trainer, but left to his own devices, he lies on the floor. He can't move at all himself. Yeah.
I have a friend whose son has Down syndrome, and she said when he was born, she already had 2 children, and she said when he was born, no one said anything positive about him. No one said, oh, he's so beautiful, he's so cute. It was really that, oh, how is he, with the tilted head and the... Is that hard as a mother?
It is. I mean, we were lucky again because Down syndrome, from day dot, we got this lovely kind of foggy period where everyone was very hopeful and optimistic and he'll be fine. So I think it was different in that sense. But yeah, it's frustrating. But you kind of, how you are and you know that you're okay and you know that these people just haven't realised. And anyone that meets Arlo and gets to know him gets it because they see he's happy, we're happy, we're okay. But I do get annoyed when I see people looking at us from across the park and it frustrates me. That, I was that person and I'm just like, you fool, like you have no idea, but I was that person before.
I've been that person.
Yeah.
What can he do? What are some of the things Arlo's good at?
He smiles a lot. He's a really happy kid. He's so engaged. We're not sure if he is intellectually impacted, but it doesn't appear so. He can't speak, but he communicates in so many other ways.
How does he communicate?
He makes a lot of noise. He babbles, very much communicates with his eyes. He's actually using a device now where he will be able to write everything with his eyes, which is so cool.
Doesn't have use of his arms or his legs?
He does, but it's not. As soon as he tries to do something, the message gets scrambled and his body throws him off. So it's really tricky. He's more dystonic than spastic. I still hate the word spastic, but anyway, he's more dystonic than spastic. So he's tricky. He does have strength.
What's dystonic mean?
Again, I'm so bad at explaining.
Here's you throwing out these words. Of course I'm going to ask what they mean.
Yeah, I don't want you to actually ask me what they mean. So if spastic CP is weak muscles, dystonic is more about a miscommunication between the brain and the muscles. So he's got strength. It's there sometimes, but as soon as he tries to do anything, it just throws it. So the way we teach him to do things is tons of repetition, like muscle memory, and that's how we've managed to teach his legs to walk and things like that.
That must be so frustrating for him.
Yeah, it is. And he's starting to show that frustration a bit. And it's hard because he can't tell us what's wrong. We always worry that he might be in pain and he can't tell us. So we're really trying to get all this, technology, this device going so we can unlock him. It was amazing the first time we put him in front of this machine and seeing, he just played a game. He was following a butterfly around the screen or whatever, but we were it was like talking to an alien life form or something. We were like, oh my God, this is our son. We can finally see his brain and what's going on.
Right.
We were bawling. It was such a cool moment because we've just been dying to, unlock him. And there's so much in there, just in his eyes. You just see the universe in his eyes and the way he looks. He's so observant. He's always watching people and smiling and very interested. He totally knows what's going on. He's an amazing kid.
So you'll have the ability in time with technology. Do you know how long to unlock him? That's such a great way of putting it.
Yeah, I don't know. We're working on it. At the moment, he's just making choices and playing games on there. So he'll choose, I want to read a book or I want you to blow some bubbles. So that's what he's doing on there at the moment. He's not really talking with it yet. But, yeah, the plan is for him to go to school with that and hopefully then we'll be able to talk with him. Already you can definitely ask him, do you want some dinner? And he'll let you know, he'll smile or he'll make a noise. So we can communicate with him. He just doesn't use words.
What's it like being out in public? You said about how being at home, life is in quotes, normal.
Yeah.
It's only, and this is a theory about disability, isn't it? I remember Stella Young, the disability advocate that we lost a couple of years ago, talked about how it was the world that was, her theory was around social disability. It wasn't that she had a problem. It was that it was only when she encountered the world that was not built for her that there was a problem.
She's so right. Like, it's a big cop out to blame society, but it really does feel like that. Only recently, so Arlo was able to fit into like a standard pram until quite recently. So we kind of got around and not too much happened. Like if someone was close, they might be like, oh, that's weird that, an older child is in a pram. Now we have this, like, I was so scared of it for so long. It's a big double pram that is quite clearly not like a mainstream.
Because Odie is only 1.5.
Yeah.
She needs to go in the pram too.
So she slots underneath, and he's in this incredibly like modified, pimped up seat on the top, which is awesome. It turns into a high chair and a floor sitter. He's finally supported and comfortable. But it is obvious that this isn't your standard double pram. So people definitely now are noticing and looking. I haven't had any comments yet.
So no one's gone, hey, where'd you get that? That looks so snazzy.
No. Well, I think it's quite obvious that it's not. I think people might be scared to say anything about it.
Is it becoming clearer? Because my cousin Ondine said the same thing. When her twin boys were small, little kids, no one really pays much attention. But as they get older and they're in prams or people start to stare.
Yes, it is just starting to happen. I mean, Arlo's only 3.5 now, and I'm bracing myself. But we're lucky because in our community, he's quite well known. He goes to the daycare. We're really friendly with our neighbours.
So he goes to a regular daycare?
Yeah, just mainstream. Like we went to a couple of
mainstream.
interviews.
Is that the better word than regular?
Is it? I don't even know.
Well, I was going to say I'm catching myself because I was going to say, so he goes to a normal daycare, but that's not right. Mainstream.
I guess that's the right
Come on,
thing.
you're here to teach us some things.
But like I said, I really don't want to put like rules around it because I'd rather people were talking about this stuff than being too scared to say anything. And I don't want to say that I'm the authority on it. I still have no idea. I'm still learning. But yeah, he's in a mainstream. Let's go with that. Daycare. And yeah, we'd been to a couple to check them out and just the vibe wasn't great. But this one, it's beautiful. It's small. It's flat. We went in there and they were just having him no matter what we said. I was like, oh, sometimes he vomits. He might have a bit of a seizure. You still need to spoon feed him, bottle feed him, burp him, handle him. And they were just like, yep. It's fine, so fine. And they took him in. They, his physio, OT, speech therapists have all been in there to teach them how to do his exercises and how to handle him. They found some magical library of equipment where you can get, like, he's more set up at daycare than he is in our house. Like, they have this awesome chair for him and a table and just made life so much easier and better for us. And
Does he enjoy it?
He loves it. He absolutely loves it. And he has friends. He has like 20 little friends. And, whenever we miss daycare, like if he's in hospital or has an appointment, we bring him back and his locker is like stuffed full of like notes and cards and books and presents. And, they're from the kids, but really they're from these beautiful parents who've all, like they all know Arlo because we forget that other 3.5-year-olds talk. So they obviously all go home to their parents and tell them all about Arlo. And it's really awkward because then they come up to us and they're like, Arlo this. And I'm like, I have no idea who you are, but thank you.
My daughter was at a mainstream kindy with a little girl who had CP. And I want to say it was an incredible experience for every kid that went to that kindy. Like it was invaluable. For every kid and every parent to have that exposure was just such a gift for the whole community, I think.
That's what it feels like. Yeah. And that's what I have found is that's the special thing. It's the perspectives change. And you don't want to go down the inspirational path. It just normalizes it. They realize it's something they thought was the most horrendous thing imaginable. I thought it was, the end of the world, a total nightmare. It's not. And he's, pretty ordinary in a lot of ways. And he goes to daycare and he has friends.
Is he naughty?
Yeah, he's cranky. I mean, he doesn't move around. So he's, he's easy in a lot of ways. But yeah, he gets grumpy, definitely. But most of the time he's really happy kid.
When you were having the emergency Caesar, in amongst all the chaos, they noticed there was a cyst on your ovary.
Yes.
That ended up being precancerous, and they removed that ovary. So, and they want to remove your other ovary. So they said, if you're going to have another baby, you better get on with it. So Odie came along less than 2 years after Arlo.
Yes.
How did you feel about that?
We were shitting ourselves. Like, we were so scared, even though there was no reason to think that this would happen again. It was so random. Like, they couldn't figure out what happened with Arlo. They, examined my placenta. They looked at everything and they were like, it was just random. You just happened to be in the right place at the right time. They really rescued him. He probably would have been a stillborn. So, yeah, we had no reason to think it would happen again, but we did. We were really closely monitored. We were given like special treatment. And that just meant, I don't know that it was such a good thing, because it meant we had so many scans. There were all these opportunities for an anomaly to be seen. And, they thought her head was growing a bit too fast for her body at one point. They thought she had a hole in her heart at one point. So there were so many opportunities for us to freak out. It was not fun. Like, I wasn't a very happy pregnant person. I had to force myself at one point toward the end. I forced myself to go out and buy like this little pink onesie, just to be like, it's most likely that there will be a little pink body to put in this onesie, because I was just so sure that something would go wrong again. Yes, it wasn't fun, but we had a planned cesarean 2 weeks before her due date, and it all went pretty fine. She actually had to go into the NICU for a little while because she wasn't breathing, and all the nurses were like, I'm so sorry, you're the last people that needed this. But she was fine, medically boring.
How did you manage your head through that whole period? Because I think that the mental process of being pregnant after you've had a miscarriage or had a traumatic birth or a stillbirth, it is a head problem as much as a physical one.
Say it. Yeah. So I see a therapist fortnightly. She really helped me.
Yeah.
I was also lucky in that, so I've made some friends through Arlo's physio centre. We sit in the waiting room together, and I'd made quite good friends with a couple of women there, and one of them was pregnant with her fourth at exactly the same time I was pregnant with Odie, so we were freaking out together the whole way through.
It's helpful.
That was really
you need
good.
that support, right?
Yeah, and oh my gosh, yeah, the other parents you meet in this gig are just the best support you can get, for sure.
You talk in the book about how they all kept saying to you, it's going to be fine. Like, it's actually going to be okay. There's all sorts of good things that come with this as well as the difficult ones.
Yeah, definitely. And if you speak to parents who are a bit further along, like certainly where I am now, I can say that it's going to be okay. And even when it's not okay, it's still okay. Like
you will laugh again. You will be happy again. You will have joy again.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to speak for everyone when I say that, because there are some parents who are not happy. They're not joyful. They really struggle. Some parents lose their child, but I think it's fairly safe to say that generally in life, no matter what happens to you, with time, you'll get back to a kind of base level of okayness. Yeah, and I've certainly found that to be true.
Odie's too young to sort of be able to articulate much about Arlo yet, but you talk about, and through your book you interview a lot of different families, and there's a section on siblings, and you spoke to one mother who has two kids, and one of them had sort of been in and out of the hospital recently, and she was talking to her other child who didn't want to say what she was feeling, and she encouraged her to speak, and she finally said, sometimes I feel like it would have been easier if Riley had died. And the mother looked at her and she said, don't you think that I've also thought that? And she said her daughter looked so shocked that her mother would have thought that. And she said it was really important to be able to then say there's a difference between having a thought and actually wanting something to happen.
Yes, totally. And I think from speaking with parents who have older kids, who have both typical and non-typical, it's so important to be able to validate their feelings and make them not feel like they're terrible for having these thoughts. I think all parents probably have terrible thoughts about their children, regardless of whether they got disability or not. And yeah, acknowledging that that's all it is. It's just a thought. You're not going to act on it. It doesn't make you a bad person. And I think it's just important to be honest about feelings around this. Like, it's not fair and it's really hard sometimes. Sometimes it really sucks and there are going to be terrible days. And just to own that and to sit in it and be like, yeah, this is shit, but you know what? I'm going to keep moving through it and tomorrow might be a little less shit. And I think, certainly with our kids, like, I'm going to give Odie the opportunity. Like, that mother actually has this tradition with her daughter where every night they hang out for 10 minutes and, you know, she says, just tell me how you're feeling. This is your opportunity to say however you're feeling, throw anything at me. And I think that's a really good practice. Let's see how I go with it. But I'd love to introduce something like that with Odie, because there's this whole concept of the forgotten sibling. And there are all these horrible statistics around siblings to kids with disability, you know, having greater rates of depression and suicide and stuff. And I'm really conscious to avoid that as best I can and just, you know, try and give our kids equal attention, which is hard. Like, Arlo has lots of appointments and we obviously have to physically support him a lot more than we do with her. But we need to give her time and give her the opportunity to tell us how she's feeling.
What surprised you the most about parenting Odie?
Everything about that kid has blown our minds because we're just not used to. She just develops. She just learns things on her own. I'll say a word to her a few times and then she's saying it back to me. Even really early on, just the little movements in her fingers, the little movements in her tongue. Like, you don't realise, but Arlo is so affected in every muscle, so his mouth and tongue, and, you know, that's why he can't eat very well. We still puree all of his foods and he's spoon-fed. Whereas, Odie's tongue is moving all over the place and just the tiny little things. And she just, we're so poorly trained as well. Like, she had her 6-month vaccinations and the doctor said, oh, so is she sitting up yet? And we were like, oh, no, I don't think so. And then we got home and sat her up and she just sat and we're like, oh.
And thought to try.
No, and I remember the first time I walked into our bedroom, which was her bedroom at the time, and she was standing up in the cot and I shrieked in horror. I was terrified and like ran out and slammed the door because my mind is not used to babies standing up in the cot. My mind is used to babies lying flat and that's it. I'm just so conditioned in this really weird way.
And then moving and crawling and walking.
Yeah. So that really freaked me out.
So she's almost like a first child in a different way.
In lots of ways she is, yeah.
And what surprised you about being Arlo's mum?
Oh, just how something that I thought would be the worst possible thing. Like, I never would have had children had I known I would have had a child with disability. Like, not only is it okay, it's pretty amazing a lot of the time. And it's taught me a lot. It's opened my eyes to what this world actually is. Like, nearly 1 in 5 Australians has disability. Like, I had no idea. And people I've met, like the people that work in the sector, adults living with disability, you know, I had just closed my eyes to all that and I was missing out on so much.
What's the amazing parts? What are some of those?
Oh, just with Arlo, just how I now look at everyone differently because of him. I'm still bloody judgmental, I'm sure, but hopefully a bit less than I was. And just the way that this experience brings parents together. Like, I've made such good friends with these, you know, other mothers and fathers, and the way we can talk is just so honest, and I just get so much out of those relationships. And the way it's brought our family closer, you know, everyone was pretty devastated at the start of this, but now we all get it. We all see what this actually is, and it's just made us so close and, like, really happy as a family.
Do you think about Arlo's future much?
I try really hard not to, because that is one of the things where if you go into it, it's terrifying. It puts you in a really bad place. One of the strategies that parents taught me when I asked them, how do you feel better, is stay the hell out of the future, stay in the moment. Because as soon as I start thinking, you know, I mean, already he's getting pretty heavy and it scares me to think I'm not going to be able to help and handle my own son in the ways that I need to. There are hoists and wheelchairs and all this in our future. As soon as I start going down that path, that's when I can't handle this. Whereas if you stay in the moment, and I mean, I'm not that great at the mindfulness stuff, but this experience, I must say, has made me a lot better at it. Firstly, like self-preservation, it's too scary to go into the future. But secondly, because it's just a better way to be. Like, I've learned that anything can happen in life. There's not too much point in thinking too far ahead. And I've also learned that when the worst possible thing in the world, so you think, happens to you, you're not necessarily going to feel that way about it when it actually happens to you. So I've learned there's really no point in worrying about things happening in the future. They may not happen, they may, and you just don't know how you're going to feel about them anyway. So, yeah, I stay in the moment as much as I can.
Well, that's pretty special.
I think so.
Thanks so much, Mel.
Oh, thank you for having me,
Congrats on the book. It's so great.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Mel's book is great. It's called Special, and it's part memoir and part advice from other parents of kids who have disabilities. It's refreshing, honest, it's funny, and it's extremely insightful. So if you or someone that you know could benefit from reading it, please tell them about this podcast and about Special. Talking to Mel was just, I don't know, so refreshing. She's just a joy, and she's also someone that makes you feel really calm. She's such a good writer. She's a remarkable woman. And if you'd like to read some of her writing, search up Melanie Dimmit on mamamia.com.au. You can find her book Special at any good bookstore. And if you're after something else to listen to, may I suggest an interview with my very dear friend Vanessa Crownfield, who speaks candidly about her daughter, Gretel, who has Down syndrome. And Vanessa is a friend of the pod. I know she'll be listening to this now, and I know that she would have loved to have had access to a book like Special when Gretel was born all of those years ago. Follow the links in our show notes to hear my interview with Vanessa. No Filter is produced by Eliza Ratliff. I'm Mia Friedman, and you can find me on Insta or Facebook at Mia Friedman, or you can sign up for my newsletter at miafriedman.com.au, and I'll see you on Mamma Mia. This episode of No Filter was brought to you by the Toyota Kluger.